Okay, members, we've just gone 1/4 past, so I'll ask Katie if she can set the YouTube feed live for us. So 1 second for me, and then I'll let you know when we're good to go.
Thank you, James.
Okay, we're live. Over to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Good afternoon, members, officers, and the general public, and I welcome you to this planning meeting on the 21st of April 2021. One thing I would like to say before we actually start the agenda is for members of the public, as we all know, this is live streamed. We know every application that comes forward is important, but today is a rather large application. There's been a lot of comments. What I'd just like to say is people who have written to us as members, myself as chair, email or in writing, if you don't get an acknowledgement, please do not think that is because it's ignored. I am aware that certain members do reply with a thanks, but I also will have to say that a member of this committee, we are not by law allowed to comment on either predetermination, error or thoughts. That is left for this meeting. So I hope the members of the public understand that. It's not that you're ignored, far from it. This committee takes things, everything that's in front of us very seriously, and I have to say once again, it has worked well since all the lockdown systems have been in place. Okay, as usual, members, I will read out your names to make sure that you are with us. So you know the ropes fine now. If you could say yes, if I don't hear from you, I will come back just to see if you have arrived. If not, he'd be absent. Councillor Coleman-Cook.
Here, Chair.
Councillor Alban.
Yeah, here, Chair.
Councillor Jill Bayford.
Here, Chair.
Councillor Curry.
Here, Chair.
Councillor Dennis.
Here, Chair.
Councillor Patmore.
Here, Chair.
Councillor Garner.
I'm here, Chair.
Councillor Hart.
Here, Chair.
Councillor Keane. Councillor Paulmore.
Here, Chair.
Councillor Scott. I heard movement there. Come back there. Councillor Ozeski.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Wright.
Here, Chair.
And obviously myself. Also on the line tonight, we have our planning applications manager, Mr. Livingston, planning manager, Annabelle Hebbins, Mr. James Waite, who is Kent Highways, KCC Highways, James Capson, who is Democratic Services, Suki Montague, sorry, Suki, if I got that wrong, but that's our legal officer, and Katie, who's in the background, who will take calls from members if necessary. So welcome, everybody. If you, once again, members of the public, I'm sure we have quite an audience there this afternoon. I will go through the process as usual. If you have any technical difficulties during the meeting, then please contact Democratic Services, who are on call, who will attempt to assist you. Today it is Katie, and her number is 577046, and this will be placed as it will be. Thank you, Katie. It is in the chat box on your right, and thank you, Councillor Scott. You are here now. I would ask participants to mute your microphone when you are not speaking. This minimises background noise and will help everyone in listening to the proceedings. Microphones must only be on if the participant has been granted permission to speak. To gain permission to speak, would you please indicate once again in the chat box? It is a lot easier, if you don't mind, members, than raising the hand on the page. And as I've said before, if I don't catch your name coming up, please indicate and shout to me. Would everybody present please ensure that their mobile phones are turned to silent and they are not used to make or receive phone calls whilst the meeting is in progress. Please also refrain from checking emails or conducting other business, and ensure that you are in a quiet room free from distractions for the duration of the meeting. You also note that this meeting is being live streamed to members of the public, and following the meeting, the recording of this meeting will be on the council's YouTube channel. Members requesting to speak under Council Procedure 20.1. I have Councillor Gregory, Councillor Farrance, Councillor Boyd, and Councillor Pugh. Are there any other members who are listening wish to speak under 20.1 who aren't on the committee? There isn't. Thank you very much. Item number 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies from Councillor Keane. Are there any other apologies? Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Agenda item 3, which is scheduled of planning applications and public speaking. I just will hand over to Mr. Livingston, who has a point of information for members.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a few updates with regards to the item on the agenda this evening. One issue relates to condition 6 on the agenda, which refers specifically to a parameter plan for the proposed development. Officers need to update the plan reference to include revision C at the end of the reference to CSA 4430122. And that's the plan that we've consulted upon, and it's the plan that members will be seeing shown this evening. In the heads of terms in that section of the agenda, reference is made to the split of tenure of the affordable housing. Now, this is being updated by officers from what's in the agenda to 80% affordable rent and 20% shared ownership or future affordable housing product. In the report, it's down as 70-30 split, but that's not what's reflected in the viability information. And the last thing from me before we get going, there have been 11 objections that have been received by the council directly since publishing the agenda. They've raised the same issues as summarised in the agenda that's before you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. Okay, moving on to agenda item 3A, which is the land on the north west and south east sides of Shottendane Road, Margate. We'll ask the legal officer, Suki, now to read out the public statements, if you would, Suki.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there are 4 statements, and I'll start with the statement of the applicant. This is the applicant's supporting statement of Mr. Ball, Planning Director at Gladman Developments Limited. I would begin by expressing my thanks to members for the opportunity to provide this statement. I also extend my thanks to officers for the time they have dedicated to considering this application. The advice that has been provided from pre-application stage through to today has always been of the highest professional standard. The application site is a strategic housing allocation under policy SP21 of the Thanet local plan. As will be noted from our submission, although the allocation expected the site could accommodate 550 homes, our application proposes up to 450. The reduced quantity of housing is a necessary response to enable us to accommodate site constraints alongside site infrastructure. In preparing our proposals, we have kept site delivery at the forefront of our thinking. Master planning has occurred iteratively as key evidence has become available. All notable findings have been relayed to relevant officers from Thanet Council and Kent County Council at the earliest opportunity. Given the extent of evidence that has informed our submission, we have the utmost confidence that the plans before you are deliverable and have agreed to conditions that require future applications to accord with these principles. It is, of course, important to acknowledge that delivery leads not only to new housing, but also a new link road, which is an important component of the inner circuit road improvement scheme that will bring wider strategic benefits, plus creating a bypass around Coffin House Corner. It is because of these benefits we have spent additional time satisfying ourselves that the alignment and the geometry of the road can be achieved, and have carried out significant engagement with Kent County Highway Authority. As set out within the officer report, we have committed to entering into a legal agreement that safeguards the internal route corridor of the link road. The agreement also safeguards further land in the west of the site that can be drawn on by the County Council if it is successful securing major road network funding. Unfortunately, the engineering challenge of delivering the link road comes with abnormal costs that have had to be considered alongside other contribution requests. We have been open about the effect of these costs on our submitted viability appraisal. The appraisal has been confirmed by the Council's independent expert, who agrees that the affordable housing proposed results in a deficit in the benchmark land value. To effectively balance viability against the potential future funding of the link road by Kent County Council, we have worked with officers to agree on an infrastructure pot that will allow Kent to determine where requested contribution funds are best directed. We have also agreed to a review mechanism that would enable county contributions to be topped up in the event it is successful in securing MRN funding. That's major road network funding. There will also be a separate review that will capture changes in development viability, with any identified surplus then channeled towards off-site affordable housing. We have worked collaboratively with officers to bring you this application today. We fully endorse their recommendation and hope you can too. Just excuse me a moment, Chairman. Right, this is the second statement, and it is a statement objecting to the application from Mr. Dickman, Vice Chair, Salmston Ward Residents Association. And he says, I am seeking to oppose planning application OLTH 200847 on the following grounds: highways and ecology. Highways. Manston, Shottenden are main arteries into Margate, especially for tourists. Developments at Salmston and Manston, Shottenden will increase traffic flow exponentially. Manston Road is unique as it has a school, crematorium, graveyard, and the public refuge centre all within 800 metres of each other, thus being a highway for a high level of local traffic. This, combined with holiday traffic, often results in Manston Road becoming gridlocked at various times throughout the year. I feel that the proposed changes in traffic routes and the increase in traffic will inevitably have a negative effect on local residents, the community wishing to use the vital amenities and tourism on Thanet. Ecology. Along with the proposed development in the field adjacent to Salmston Grange, there will be a total of 700 houses stretching down from the high ground at Salmston into the valley of the field at the northwest of Shottenden Road. I have a major concern that the extra water from 700 roofs, drain pipes and hard surfaces will inevitably find its way to the lowest point in the valley. As the Tivoli Brook runs through the valley and is joined by a confluence of other brooks, I believe that there is a very real risk of flooding, which is borne out by previous history. Perhaps my greatest concern is that the brook eventually empties into the Margate main sands, and a large influx of water from residential dwellings, combined with nitrates from the existing fields, could well have a detrimental effect on the coastal water quality. In my view, this development potentially contravenes the recommendations in the National Planning Policy Framework. Section 14, subsection 166, brackets, meeting the challenge of climate change, flooding and coastal change, close brackets, and section 15, subsection 170, brackets, conserving and enhancing the natural environment, close brackets. Can we please ensure that a verification report has been carried out on the effect of surface water by an independent and qualified professional, as my greatest fear is that this development could have a catastrophic effect on Thanet's tourist industry, which our growth is dependent on. Rowan Dickman. Okay, there is now a statement objecting to the application from Mrs. Channing. I am writing to object to the above planning application on two separate grounds: common sense and social responsibility / conscience. Firstly, in terms of common sense and practicality, a development of this size and in this position makes very little sense. The loss of prime agricultural land, made even more important by our choice to leave the EU and seek homegrown produce, as well as land which supports a range of flowers and animals, must surely be protected. In addition, there have been no less than 3 new developments started or completed in less than a mile of Shottenden Road in the past 5 years. And of those not yet completed, at the top and bottom of Nash Road, it is my understanding that these have not all been sold off plan. How can the developer and the council justify the need for additional housing when we are already offering these resources elsewhere? Secondly, and just as significantly, I object to the development on the grounds of social and moral conscience. Having worked in teaching in the local areas for the majority of my life, I can see firsthand the levels of poverty and deprivation that students and their families encounter in the local area, one of the most deprived wards in Kent. I can see that the developer has made a cursory mention of access points, public outdoor space and a play area. Where is their, or indeed the council's, if this is approved, commitment to supporting local infrastructure, transportation, services, education? Approximately 1,800 new residents in Thanet. As we know that in the current climate and due to the levels of deprivation mentioned in the local area above, that the people of Thanet will not be able to take advantage of this new development, or they would have already done so in the other developments already on offer, will be using these already stretched and struggling services. Finally, it is the responsibility of the council to ensure that the needs of the existing community of Thanet is best served. I am yet to find any compelling evidence that developments of this sort and in this sort of position benefit anyone in the local community. Rather, this development would destroy a piece of much needed green space in an area already overserved with housing developments of this sort, as well as disadvantaging the people of Thanet still further by increasing competition for employment, of which we already have the dubious honour of having most adults unemployed in the county of Kent, saturating the local schools and amenities and placing further strain on health and social care in the community. I can see all these issues arising from approval for this development and not one concrete advantage to the community living there. I would urge the council to reject this proposal based on the above grounds and to keep the needy in our community already in their minds and hearts. And finally, there is a statement objecting to the application from Mr. Woodward. He says, this development is in the local character area, the Thanet undulating chalk farmland. This is described in the local plan as an area of high quality agricultural land of value for farmland and roosting coastal birds. The openness and undeveloped character of the farmland contributes to the essentially rural character and relatively dark skies. Also, a part of the national character area, the North Kent Plains, Natural England quotes, Thanet forms a discrete and a distinct area characterised by its unity of land use arising from high quality fertile soils. Open with few trees, the area is dominated by wide views over an extensive land cover of cereals, root crops and other horticultural crops. It states that we need to manage and enhance the productive agricultural landscape, including support for the area's farmland birds, and that it will be more important to safeguard high quality agricultural land in development planning. It adds that future development should seek to protect and enhance the assets which provide a strong sense of place. Increasing sense of history could lead to increased sense of place by reinforcing the historic character of the landscape. This landscape is vital for food production and protected farmland birds, including those identified by DEFRA, the lapwing, redshank and corn bunting, and the infamous skylarks. It forms part of a functional land key for the coastal birds of the protected SPA/SSSI coast. It is also the last part of central Thanet with the relatively dark skies, supporting 6 species of protected bats and species of protected owls. This area provides tranquility and open space, vital for mental health. Footpath TM14 on the boundary of the development is on adjacent land, currently an open countryside enjoyed by many. Thanet's heritage is based on thousands of years of farming. Farming is the fabric of our landscape. If this plan gets approved, all of this will change. By not engaging with local farmers throughout the planning process and by not considering the current use of land and the economic viability of the farmer who is producing food on these 2 fields in question, the central character area is likely to lose current farming practice, eroding the current benefits it provides. This development is viewed in isolation, but is connected to Birchington and Westgate's planned 1,650 and 2,000 houses via the Inner Circuit Road development and Section 106 payments. All these developments are in the same character area and combined will lead to a loss of 30 to 40% of the high quality farmland which, as stated, should be safeguarded. The housing, street lit roads and roundabouts associated with this development will remove the last patch of dark skies in the area, currently vital for protected species including bats and little owls. As mentioned in agenda item 3A, page 35 to 37, the remaining central farmland will be carved up by road improvements, footpath and bridleway upgrades. All of this is on land owned by the same farmer who farms the Shuttenden fields. None of this has been assessed. We know because the farmer has never been consulted. If farms become unviable, this landscape and its functionality will change. It is that simple. The following policies are affected by this proposal. Policy SP 14.5, General Housing Policy regarding assessment and mitigation of functional land for roosting and feeding birds. Policy SP 28, regarding the protection of the international and European designated sites. Policy SP 30, regarding restoration and enhancement of existing habitats and mitigation against the loss of farmland bird habitats. There is no provision for this. Policy SP 31, Biodiversity Opportunity Areas, owned by farmers whose viability is affected. Investment on their part to enhance biodiversity will come into question. Policy SE 08, Light Pollution. This will be impact on the character of the surroundings and on protected and vulnerable species due to increased traffic and street lights in the last dark part of Thanet. Policy SP 34. The wider countryside will be reduced. This will impact recreation and enjoyment of the current population. Policy SP 36, Conservation and Enhancement of Thanet's Historic Environment. Farming, farmland and its unique soils is Thanet's historic environment. It is being lost. Policy SP 38, Healthy and Inclusive Communities. Access to nature will not be improved. Finally, Policy SP 26 states that the Council will identify and support opportunities to conserve Thanet's landscape character and local distinctiveness, including that of the central part of the district with a sense of openness and big skies. Developments should demonstrate how they will conserve and enhance Thanet's local distinctiveness. Should this development go ahead, the damage will be irreparable. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Suki. Well done, thank you. Normally, members, as you're fully aware, when we're in normal times, speakers would only have 3 minutes. Now we have, or I have, sort of waived that rule over the past 12 months. I know we have speakers under 20.1 coming up. I will do similar, but I will keep an eye on the time and try not to repeat what each other, if I make sense there. So I want to be fair with everyone on timing. So first of all, if I may call Ward Councillor, Councillor Gregory.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 points. And my first point is Thanet District Council declared a climate emergency in July 2019, and TDC resolved to address the loss and reduction of agricultural land to address plant and animal diseases. And TDC stated, "We are running out of time before these changes become irreversible. We can still do something about it, but we have to start to act now. That's what makes it an emergency." These are TDC's words. Point 2. The legal agreement submitted in support of this application contains this commitment: £388,800 towards creating capacity at the Limes medical practice or within the primary care network. This is the cost of one of the proposed new houses, but while that money may provide bricks, it won't provide the staff needed for the Limes to function with the extra patients for this development. The clinical commissioning group for the Limes catchment area in this proposal alone estimates 1,080 new patient registrations. The CCG state there must be appropriate medical service capacity, and any planned developments need to support delivery of sustainable services for the future. Currently, the UK has 2.8 doctors per thousand of population, and this is well below the EU average, and the situation is worsening. The Royal College of GPs identified Kent as particularly deprived of GPs, needing at least a 50% increase in GP numbers to cope with the population changes and shortage of doctors. Kent currently has around 850 GPs. 24.4% of them are over the age of 55, and some will consider early retirement. Since 2019, the Royal College of GPs cite a 3.7% drop in their numbers of full-time GPs since 2015. The last National GP Work-Life Survey reported that 2 out of every 5 GPs intend to leave in the next 5 years. If this development goes ahead, having an additional 1,080 patients will add an extra burden of stress on an already stressed workforce, making early retirement even more attractive. Together with the GP shortages is the government's Sustainability and Transformation Plan, which proposes a 10% reduction in hospital beds by 2021. For Kent, this is 300 fewer beds. You will have already noticed many services cut from QEQM with patients travelling further afield. There are no local incentive schemes in Kent to encourage healthcare professionals to come to Thanet, and to turn Thanet into one unsightly urban sprawl will not entice professionals when they could be rewarded elsewhere with a better environment and better staffed medical facilities. There's also currently 46,000 registered nurse vacant posts. Vacancies go unfilled at the local hospitals, putting pressure on the existing workforce. And stress and low-paying conditions see a huge staff turnover. With this proposal and other developments waiting in the wings, our local residents' health needs cannot be met with an influx of new residents. To misquote a former Prime Minister, there is no magic GP tree, there is no magic registered nurse tree. To ensure the safety and health needs of our residents, I urge the Planning Committee to reject this development's application. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Gregory. Speaking also as Ward Councillor, Councillor Farrance.
Thank you, Chair. Along with my ward residents, I have many concerns about this development, including the loss of arable land, green spaces and our valuable wildlife. And this last year has ensured we're all very well aware of the importance of green spaces to our mental health and well-being. But the affordable housing quota has been reduced to only 10% on this development, apparently down to the high cost and complexity of the required infrastructure, drainage, roads, etc., due to so many difficulties involved in building on this land. Does this indicate that the land isn't suitable for a housing development in Thanet when we all know we need as much affordable housing as possible? And it's sending a very risky signal to future developers if we agree to only 10% affordable housing, whatever the reason. Thanet needs as much affordable housing as possible. But I also want to question the basis of the viability studies which support the 10% affordable housing. The viability assessment in Annex 1, published last June, points out that due to the pandemic, transaction values, and I quote, have fallen to unprecedented levels, and there is a demonstrable correlation between such volumes falling and a reduction in values. The viability assessment is predicated on present day values nearly a year ago. We all know that the housing market has improved considerably since that time, particularly the demand for homes by the sea. So an assessment undertaken nearly a year ago must be reviewed. It may well reveal that 30% affordable housing is now viable. And the assessment actually states itself that, quote, any improvement in the sales value assumptions would most likely be reflected in an improvement in scheme viability. And my second point is I have to mention GP provision, a few different angles to Councillor Gregory. Residents are very concerned about this. This is a topic that comes up so much. So there was a meeting of the Kent and Medway Clinical Commissioning Group, the CCG, last week. And they actually said that the Thanet GP system was fragile and was struggling with the low number of GPs. Now, I've been asking the Limes and the CCG to prioritise attracting more GPs to Thanet for the last 2 years. They tell me they've tried everything and it's been impossible. The CCG has steadfastly refused to consider offering incentives, they say they can't, such as enhanced payments or golden handshakes. Any sort of incentives that we could encourage more GPs to Thanet hasn't been taken up. Specifically, the Limes in Margate has approximately 5,000 patients per GP, compared to a national average of 1,800, nearly 3 times as much. This proposed development, on top of the other new 250 houses planned for Salmston, is in the Limes catchment area. They say there'll be 1,080 new patients based on an occupancy of only 2.4 people per dwelling. The developers can contribute to an extension at the Limes, but how are they going to recruit more doctors? That is the crucial question. We simply cannot agree to our population increasing overall in Thanet by up to 50,000 people without any more medical provision. Councillor Gregory has talked about the hospital angle of this, also, of course, vital. So we must insist that the Kent and Medway CCG take action to address the shortage of GPs in Thanet before any more housing developments can be agreed. I therefore ask you to reject this application, or at least ensure that such a major decision for Thanet is not delegated to officers but comes back to our elected members on the planning committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Farrance. And I call upon Councillor Boyd, who is speaking under Council Procedure 20.1. Councillor Boyd.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for letting me speak. I'll be brief as much as possible. I'm here today basically because I'm quite concerned about how much green infrastructure is going to be impeded and the lack of green infrastructure placed into this plan. The field's actually back onto my house, so I see it every day, and obviously it backs onto my wall personally. There is a very good separation of settlements where this land is. I think it's fair to say that piece of land, the residents there do not feel part of the suburb, do not feel part of the town, and I think this will merge the barriers quite considerably. My colleagues have already mentioned things about wildlife. It's quite a dark area. The health and well-being of the bats is quite a concern, but also the mental well-being of ourselves, so being able to use cycle paths and being able to go on those walks. The design itself, although they said, yes, we've got green land, Just to simply put a patch of green land in the corner of a development is not good enough, because you've still got a built up area around all of that planned. And something else I would pick up on is where you've got a children's play area, great, which is overlooked by all of these houses. But what about the teenagers? All you're going to get is a lot of gathering, because it's not going to be good enough. It's not going to be substantial. There's big cries out now for stuff for teenagers to do in Margate, for example, skate parks and all sorts of stuff like that. And this plan simply does not cover it. So I think it's quite unfair for it to be passed, oh, it's okay because we've got something for 5 to 8 year olds. Because at the end of the day, you're just going to get people that live there with teenagers who have got nowhere else to go. So they're going to sit there, they're not going to cause any harm, but those residents overlooking the play area will then start calling us up to complain and thinking that it's antisocial behaviour, when pretty frankly, there's nothing else for them to do. So they're going to be victimised in that respect. But I just think that it's quite a shame that we are looking at getting rid of our green areas and having that divide, particularly when we look at green wedges which are protected in other areas of Thanet. Why are they not protected over in this little corner of Thanet? So that's all I've got to say, and I'll pass over to the next person. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Boyd. I now call upon Councillor Pugh, who's going to speak under Council Procedure 20.1. And also, if I may, I do know that Councillor Pugh and I believe other members of the committee are aware. Councillor Pugh has been given a statement, which I have allowed for part of it to be read out. So, Councillor Pugh.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good evening to members of the Planning Committee. I'll try and be brief. I understand that this is going to be a long meeting, but of course it's important that you hear not only my views, but the views of my residents. To provide some context, this site borders my ward, saying that, you know, almost all wards border the Thanet Villages ward nonetheless, as Councillor Hart will attest to. But most importantly, there's a small section just south of this site where there's a collection of houses. Those residents there are my residents in my ward, and some of them are gravely concerned about this application for a variety of reasons, particularly the adverse impact that runoff water and flooding would have of this development. But I want to touch on a few matters and a few issues to begin with, namely that I'm quite and greatly concerned that not only has this plan application been submitted for less than the total number has been allocated within the local plan, with how much work went into the local plan and how much a struggle that was, and the general strength of feeling that residents have with the allocated housing numbers, for it to not only be put forward for less numbers, and then for the applicant to argue that the affordable housing percentage should be dropped from 30% to 10%, I think quite honestly is an outrage. You know, particularly in an area where we need more affordable housing, that's evident. It's quite clear. We've already had a re-examination on the application that you all decided on last week for Minster, where the landowner or land applicant had campaigned for a 10% affordable. Instead, it was revised back up to 30%. What's most important is that with our local plan, and it's been muted with this, I'm sure, as it was muted with the point was made with the application in Minster last week, is that this land is included in the local plan. There's no doubt about that. No one is arguing anything other than that. Of course, it's allocated in the local plan as a strategic site. We get that. However, I think it's quite important, the Plan Inspectorate has accepted our local plan, and it's accepted this site as well to be allocated, if it's developed, for 30% affordable housing. So the fact that this applicant is now put forward only 10% affordable, I think is more than enough grounds to refuse permission. I mean, heck, I'd go to say if you accepted that you refused permission right now, I'd stop speaking. But I'm going to use up all of my my allocation, I'm sure. Another point that's been said is that, yes, it is in the local plan. Well, of course, this site is included in the local plan, but surely we as councillors and you as the committee, we have a duty to ensure that any application that's put forward for this site is the best that it can be. And quite honestly, I don't think this is. So regardless of whether it's in the local plan, I think that we have a duty to ensure that it's the best it is. And because this isn't, I think that you should, of course, refuse it. namely as well, and I think something else that I mentioned before, but I'll mention again at this meeting of the planning committee, is that we're not hitting our targets for the annual delivery of housing. That's clearly not something that is our fault as the council. It's not a failing that we've made, because we're granting permissions left, right and centre for quite large, considerable sites, and we have thousands and thousands of units that are waiting to be built. But one thing that I'd like to draw to the attention of the planning committee is that we annually are under-delivering our annual housing target. Namely, I think last year we only delivered circa about 50%. So, you know, the idea that we'd continue to keep granting planning permission just because this site is included in the local plan, I think is nonsense. And I think, honestly, we're doing a disservice to residents. Not only that, but close to this site, and some members will recall, around about this time last year, I think it was, or in the summer or September, there was land close to this site that was suggested by the council to be used as a site for a temporary traveller site. I think particularly the amount of strength of feeling that was felt locally against that, and the reasons for various reasons why it was then not considered. I doubt very much that a new development would take quite likely to potentially be sited next to a temporary traveller site, in the same way that residents in Garninge and the villages were concerned that that farmland was being put forward for it. Namely that, and this is something that I should have mentioned at the beginning, but I'll mention now. There was a petition that was started up that I think all members of the planning committee have now been shared with this morning, that was only started on Friday, that I think really shows the strength of feeling of local residents that they do not want this application to be granted permission. In the space of 3 or 4 days, I think it's launched on Friday afternoon, it's now got over 3,000 signatures, which is no small order over the space of a weekend. I know it's lockdown, but I think that that's incredibly important, and that the committee should take note of that. And finally, and thank you, Chair, for allowing me to read out part of a statement, but a resident of mine, Jonathan Tapp, who is the owner of Hatfield Farm, who have farmed this land for 200-300 years. I've got a section of his objection, which I believe was already included as part of the formal consultation process, and which I shared with members of the committee just before this meeting, so that you have a full copy of it. But I'd like to share out his concerns, and I think it shares the frustration that's felt locally, in that really this is just the tip of the iceberg, and that if this application is granted permission, it can open up a whole swathe of farmland, you know, in the centre of Thanet, that would just be decimated and destroyed, not only by development, but by infrastructure improvements and roads. And particularly what I would say is not only the widening of Shottendane Road, because there's sections along Shottendane Road that you can't widen because there's houses on both sides, but also the carving up of farmland for... Councillor
Pugh, please, would you come to the statement, please?
Brilliant. Thank you, Chair. I certainly will. So this is just an excerpt of Mr. Tapp's statement. This proposal is in the wrong place. It is not delivering the correct social infrastructure, no jobs, leisure or culture. It is completely car dependent. It destroys productive farmland, which has a history of farming dating many centuries before the Romans arrived. It reduces the hunting area for many raptor species here, including buzzards, kestrels, little owls, barn owls, and more recently, red kites. It reduces the area available for hares, partridges, skylarks, and sparrows. It endangers the viability of my farming business, which has been in the same family for 2 centuries. It should be rejected. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Pugh, and I did let you go on there, and I don't want other members to think that they didn't have the opportunity. I would have let yourselves. That concludes public speaking and speaking from members of the public, which members have heard. Now I'm going to hand over to officers to give their report, namely Ian Livingston, Annabelle Hemmings, and James Wright, who I mentioned earlier on, is KCC Highways. So I'll pass over to you, Ian.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll just present my screen. So I'll start off and then I'll pass to Annabelle, and then we'll pass to James and then come back to me at the end. So hopefully you can all see the screen and the red line plan. So the application is for outline planning permission, including matters of access for up to 450 houses with road infrastructure, open space, landscaping, and associated works. So the application site is outlined in red. We have Hartsdown Road to the north, Shottendane Road bisecting the two parcels of land for the site, and Manston Road in the southeast here. So particular points to note, and I'm sure members are quite familiar with the location of the site, but Margate Football Club, which obviously was at Planning Committee last month, is at the top of the screen here. We have Coffin House Corner, as it's known, here, St Gregory's Primary School here, and the cemetery, Crem, and the waste and recycling centre is just down to the south. Adjacent to the site as well is the Margate Cricket Club, which is here. So this is a satellite image just to put some colour on that. So again, you can see the cricket club, the football club, the primary school, and the cemetery. So we're looking at this site here and this bit of land here. So between the two roads on there and the two roads here. So this is a plan from the local plan. So the allocation of the site is outlined in the dotted red here. So the two sections are allocated for up to 550 dwellings. That's under a specific policy, which is policy SP21. The policy itself outlines very specific requirements for the development of this site. They are provided on page 44 of the agenda that's before you, members. The importance of this particular allocation relates to the strategic routes through the site, and they are the ones in yellow here. These are specifically allocated in policy SP47, and with particular note is the vital part of the inner circuit to support development in the district as part of the local plan and the delivery of housing to 2031 from the arms here that go through this site in particular. And obviously we can see here that it actually includes as well part of Shottendane Road. So the principal issues of this site being developed for housing were considered in the local plan examination and the adoption process, which considered the loss of agricultural land across the district when it came to the strategic allocated housing sites. As well as considering the sustainability of this site to come forward for housing. And the site is obviously now allocated for housing. And therefore the principle of development of this site has been agreed through the local plan adoption process. And the issue for members is not whether or not the site provides housing, it's how the site is developed for housing, and looking specifically at policy SP21. So I'm going to go through a few views of the site now. So to orientate members on this is a 3D modelling that's come from Google. On the bottom right-hand side of the image here is the entrance to the car park for Margate Football Club, and the cricket club is on the left-hand side here. So this is the field that is the northern parcel of land. So you can see that it's currently has trees that line the site, which is on the northern boundary, trees that surround the cricket club, and some properties here in this corner as well. And you can see Shottendane Road in the very top of the image running along here. What we're now going to look at is a view from the houses that are on Shottendane Road, which was mentioned by Councillor Pugh. We're going to look now towards the two parcels of land of the site using the same 3D modelling from Google. So this shows that the houses are mentioned. So we've got the northern parcel of land on the left-hand side of the image here. And again, you can see the trees running around the site at the moment. You have Shottendane Road here running through the site. And then you have the southern section of land, which is here. So which with Manston Road along the right-hand side here with the cemetery. Particular point to note on this site is this is an image that it shows very clearly the change in levels that occur across the site, which I'm going to talk about in a second. You can see there's a very dramatic change from the Shottendane Road up to the Manston Road, which you can obviously see here in this image. And then we're just going to look at a view across Manston Road using the same views. So this is a view just showing that field as part of the allocation, Shottendane Road running across this area here in the centre of the image. So we're now going to have a little look at the existing landscaping on the site. So this is just a plan showing the existing trees that are situated on the site. So this is useful to inform the photos that I'm about to show you, which show the on the ground relationship between the road network and the site. So you can see some of the trees that ran along the northern boundary of the site from Hartsdown Road at the end of the site where it abuts the next field, and then scattered trees along Shottendane Road and along Manston Road. So starting at Hartsdown Road, and I'm sure members will be familiar with this view going down Hartsdown Road. So this is a view down towards the cricket club at the bottom of the hill. So the site is on the right-hand side here. It's just after this hedge. So looking into the site, this on the right-hand side of the image is the trees that we saw in the 3D image. And the trees on the left-hand side here are the ones along the side of the cricket club, and we'll look at a detailed view. You can start to see the change in levels that occur across the site here. So we're higher up here, the land slopes down to adjacent to the cricket club, and you can see then there's Shottendane Road in the background, and you can see the hill where Manston Road is. This is just a bit of a closer view to show the trees along the boundary with the cricket club. Then looking from Shottendane Road, so looking back towards where we were just taking the photos from. So Arlington House is in the background of this image, right in the centre. So this is a view from Shottendane Road. So these are the trees that are behind the houses that are behind the cricket club. And you can see that the bank of trees that I mentioned along that run from Hartsdown Road all the way along the northern boundary of the site. These trees along the northern boundary are all proposed to be retained as part of the scheme, as are the trees on the right-hand side of the image. And then turning to your left from Shottendane Road, looking towards the southwest boundary of the northern parcel of land, you can see that it's a hedgerow line at the moment. Apologies, it's a slightly dark image, but you can see that there is some sense of a boundary there at the moment of the site. And then turning to the other side of Shottendane Road, where you can see that there is a bank of trees at the moment. Some of these trees are proposed to be lost as part of the highway alignment that's proposed as part of the strategic route that will change, but we'll look at that in a bit more detail in a little bit. And then last set of images, looking from Manston Road here back across to Shottendane Road, so looking to the northwest. So this is a view from Manston Road looking towards the site. You can see here quite dramatically the change in levels that occurs. The field that you can see over the brow of this hill is not the application site. It's the site to the north of that. The top of these trees here in the centre of the image are the trees to be retained as part of the development site on the northern boundary. So you can see quite the extent of level change, including the very tops of streetlights where the mouse pointer is here. And obviously the change, you can see the properties that are actually fronting Shottendane Road. Obviously you can only see the roofs of those properties. There is quite a significant land level difference. And that's been reflected in the site constraints and the way that the application site has come forward for development. So this is a plan showing the topography of the land, and the red line denotes the application site in particular. So every line here is a 5 metre difference. So at the lowest point of the land on area A, so where the whiter area is, you're looking about 4 metres above ordnance datum. The maximum that you get up to is 31 metres above ordnance datum, which is up on Manston Road. And so you can see these lines denoting a 5 metre difference show a dramatic change across from one part of the site to the other. And as members will have seen, it requires a road to be provided through this to connect to Shottendane Road, to then connect to Hartsdown Road. And that has had a significant abnormal cost in terms of excavation and engineering costs for the required road infrastructure and housing. It's also resulted in a loss of developable land. Now, one of the things that's also come about from the work that the applicant has provided and looked into is one that I know has been mentioned as a particular concern, and that relates to flooding. This has been looked at in quite a lot of detail by both the applicant in their submissions, but also subsequently by officers and consultees. So this is the plan to show surface water flooding across the site. The dark blue is where it's been considered that there is a potential high risk of flooding. So you can see the area where it runs off the field down to that lowest part of the site that we were talking about, into this area here, with further surface water risk, admittedly low risk, but still risk of surface water flooding here. Now, what that's meant is that the development has to plan for potentially a 1 in 30 year event. This information has been provided by the applicant running a surface water model to look at this, and therefore the layouts had to accommodate both the existing flows, but also accommodate a sustainable drainage system and a strategy for controlling those flows. And we'll look at the particular provision that's been made with regards to attenuation basins as well. But obviously it has meant that some of this site cannot be developed for housing because of the surface water flows in this site, and that does present site constraints in terms of the land take for numbers of houses. As well as that, and coming up in terms of the detailed work that's done after a site is allocated, is in this area here. So in the southeast corner of the site, work was done specifically with regards to trial trenching following geophysical survey work done for archaeology in consultation with KCC Archaeology. And the trial trenching that was carried out has confirmed the need for an exclusion area in the bottom southwest corner of the site, where preservation in situ of archaeological remains is required, and therefore there is no development that's proposed within the archaeological exclusion zone, which you can see in the right hand side here which part of the site we are looking at with the map on the right, with the exclusion zone at the sort of very full extent of that area B. And these constraints have resulted in the application site coming forward for less houses than is allocated, sorry, less dwellings than is allocated in the local plan allocation. So I'm now going to pass over to Annabelle, who's going to outline the detail of the proposal.
Thank you, Ian. Hopefully members can see the screen now.
We can.
Sorry, I need to go back. Bear with me, I've come too far. Sorry, members, bear with me. Sorry, members, just waiting for the presentation to reload. So hopefully members can now see a plan. Apologies for that. Ian's explained some of the context and we've seen some views surrounding the site, and I'm going to try and take members through the proposal that is now before us. I will remind members that it is an outline application for up to 450 dwellings, with only access to be considered at this time, so only points of access onto the site. All other matters, so appearance, layout, scale and landscaping, are reserved for future consideration. But as we've other outline applications of this sort of scale and nature, parameter plans and indicative master plans have been submitted to inform the reserve matters applications that will come forward if this application is granted. And they provide details that those reserve matters would have to accord and have regard to. This parameter plan is the combined parameter plan that is mentioned in condition 6, which brings together a number of the individual parameter plans that have been submitted with the application. And as I say, this plan, together with a landscape strategy plan, is the plan that's referred to in condition 6, and it sets out the principles and parameters for the subsequent reserve matters to follow and adhere to. It's quite a busy plan, but to just give you some points on this, but we will look at individual other parameter plans that come forward. We have here the routes coming through, so this would be Shotterdown Road, up from Manston Road and through to Hartsdown Road. The cricket club, the football club is just off of the slide here on the other side of Hartsdown Road. We have the cemetery, and we can also see the archaeological exclusion zone that Ian has just mentioned. So moving on, this is the building heights parameter plan. So it's taken one of the aspects that we've seen on the previous plan. And of course, as an outline, we don't have details of house designs or appearance or scale in full detail at this stage, but this does identify proposed building heights. The majority of building heights, and this is this sort of pale yellow colour here and running along the north of the site here, will be up to 2 stories in height. The darker yellow, so more centrally here, and some bits running off towards Hartsdown Road, would be up to 2.5 stories. And the orange colour, which is pretty much in the centre here, would be up to 3 stories in height. And it's noted that the 3-storey elements, or elements up to 3-storey, are located centrally within the site and around features such as the main road and open space, which we'll see in the future parameter plans. And they are also on the lower level of the site, and we've seen from Ian's presentation the considerable change in the land level between the north area A on this slide and area B of the application site. And all officers consider this approach reflects the scale and pattern of existing development in the area, which is a mix of 2-storey mainly, with some development in the roof and some bungalows. So moving on to another plan that's been submitted, and this plan shows proposed areas of open space within the application site. The requirement for open space within the allocation is for a minimum of 4.4 hectares spread across the 2 parts of the site, but it needs to be accessible from both sides. This application actually proposes some 6.3 hectares of open space. And as you can see from the slide, it is actually spread throughout the application site and does contain a mix of formal and informal spaces. You may recall seeing from Ian's presentation the area that was particularly affected by surface water. And this is the bit that runs through from here and right across this sort of central area of the plan. This is actually being developed not as building land, but would provide a linear path through the site. And it includes, as part of the sustainable drainage schemes, things like attenuation basins, which would be also a landscape feature in its own right. There are 2 equipped areas of play, which is the leaps here. So there's one within the central linear park and another one in this lower level, well, the higher level, but in the south of the site near Manston Park. There are also another 6 local areas of play, they are more informal and not equipped, but they do still provide opportunities for play space. The archaeological exclusion zone is located in this area here. And as has been mentioned, this is actually for archaeological preservation in situ. So it would actually be landscaped only and would not be accessible to the public, but it still provides a valuable amount of open space that could be landscaped. Excuse me. There is also an area here, this grey triangle, which is land that is safeguarded to allow flexibility for the alignment of Shottendane Road, because it's the proposed allocation has not been set as yet. So that land is safeguarded for that purpose. This plan is an extract from the arboricultural impact assessment, which was submitted to support the application. The purple notations are trees and hedges and groups of trees that are to be retained within the application. The red areas are actually trees that would be lost in the proposal, and it can be seen that these are along the Shottendane Road route and also in the area adjacent to Hartsdown Road, and these would be lost as a result of the need for access and for the realignment of Shottendane Road. But it can be seen that there will be a large number of, the majority of trees here will be retained. This is actually quite a detailed plan with a lot of information on it, but it is the landscape strategy plan, which is the second plan, which is named in condition 6, which all reserved matters applications would have to accord with. So this highlights areas for additional tree and hedge planting throughout the site, and including along road boundaries within proposed open spaces, for example, here adjacent to Manston Road and in the linear park itself, and also to the boundaries of the site. And there is also protection for some protected trees that lie along the side of the cricket club. It also is a detailed plan that includes details of native species of trees and planting appropriate for the different areas of the site. It also includes details of ecological enhancements that will come forward throughout the site, and also makes commitments to play provision, as we've seen in the previous slides with the leaps and the laps, and recreational paths and cycleways. It also, along this route, is footpath TM14, which is required to be retained under the allocation, and also links to be provided onto it. And this application does provide for all of that to take place. This slide is the development framework plan. So again, we can see areas of proposed open space, the main access routes that would be proposed through the site, and this together with smaller roads and connections off within the sort of developable area that would come forward. I would like to draw members' attention particularly though to the yellow asterisks around the plan, and these are actually heritage sites adjoining or nearby the application site. So we have the cemetery here with several listed and non-designated heritage assets within it. We have Salmston Grange over here, which is grade 2 star listed. We have Shottendane Nursing Home here, which is grade 2 listed. And we also have the farmhouse within the complex of Shottendane Farm, which is also grade 2 listed. Obviously, again, we do not have the finer detail of the application because it is an outline form, but it is recognised that there would be some impact on heritage assets by the development of this site for residential or for any other use. But it is considered, but this would have been considered in detail when the site was put forward for allocation through the local plan process. When looking at this application, the detail we do have before us, it is considered that the applicants have sought to minimise the impact as much as possible at this stage, given that we are looking at an outline application. There are open space buffers to certain areas of the site, and it is noticed that the nearest residential developments are to the heritage assets would be the up to 2-storey development, with the larger, taller developments being within the centre of the site, so away from the heritage assets surrounding it. So this is actually the indicative master plan, which shows the layout of, or a layout of the site, showing how the 450 dwellings could be accommodated with all the other requirements such as open space, new roads, and including the realigned link road. Again, the application site, as you can see, is here, and this is essentially an L shape. Proposed development would have a gross density of 23 dwellings per hectare over the whole site, and a net density of 34 dwellings per hectare if we just consider the developable area of the site, i.e. not the open space and roads and other spaces that are required. This is considered to be acceptable in that it would be sympathetic in terms of density to the area's rural setting and surrounding development. In terms of living conditions, again, we don't have the details of the site. The nearest residential development is in this location here. We have some at Shottendane Farm here, and various other development on Shottendane Road and Manston Road itself. The parameter plans do, however, show that landscaping is proposed to the edge of the site, and that would be enhanced through tree planting and hedge planting. And there is increased separation distance. This provides a landscape buffer between the site boundaries and the built form within the new development. It is also noted that height parameters propose the areas to the edges of the site would be up to 2 stories in height in the vast majority. So the detailed consideration of the relationship between surrounding properties and existing properties would come forward at reserve matter stage, but it is considered that this is a good starting point, and the limitations that we do have and content of the parameter plans that are before us and we are conditioning will give some comfort that we would be able to mitigate as much as possible impact on adjoining residential occupiers. And lastly, given the scale and nature of the application site, it is considered that development could be secured at the reserve matter stage that will provide a high standard of accommodation for future occupiers. Thank you, Chair. I'll now pass back to Ian.
Thank you, Annabelle. I'll just present my screen and then I will introduce James Ray from KCC Highways, who's going to talk through the slides with regards to the highway part of this development. So I'll just pass over to James.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Livingston. Yeah, I'm James Ray. I'm the Principal Transport and Development Planner for the Thanet and Dover areas for Kent County Council. I was involved in the development of the Thanet Transport Strategy in collaboration with Thanet District Council. On your screen there, I thought it'd be very useful for me to give you an oversight as to how this planning application site sits within the framework of the transport strategy. Hopefully members can see that on the screen. It's relatively blurry for me on my screen, but hopefully it's good enough for you to decipher where we are. The Thanet Transport Strategy, just to give you an update, is in its current draft is fully endorsed by Thanet Joint Transportation Board, Thanet District Council, and obviously Kent County Council. It was included in the local plan evidence base. It was a supporting document to the local plan, which was recently examined. The planning inspector had extended discussions over the transport strategy, and after that extended dialogue, it was found to be sound. There was a lot of scrutiny over the transport strategy, but in the end, the inspector was satisfied that it was a sound strategy to support the local plan and the development that's planned within it. The two main themes within the transport strategy are improving network resilience and managing journey times. So in terms of improving resilience, that means giving more routes for traffic to disperse, providing those additional routes so that when you get, somebody mentioned earlier about seasonal peaks, you've got more routes in and out of Thanet. Everybody knows what happens in Thanet when something happens on the A28, the whole of that side of the district grinds to a grinding halt. And the idea of the transport strategy is to provide that additional resilience. The primary piece of infrastructure within the transport strategy is the creation of the inner circuit that was mentioned earlier by one of the speakers. In time, this will create an improved route of highway links, and that will complement the existing primary road network. So on the screen there, you've got to the west of the district, you've got a link road between the A28 and A Coal Hill through the strategic Birchington development. An upgrade to the existing Manston Road between A Coal Hill and Shottendane Road with associated junction improvements. And then an upgrade to the existing Shottendane Road corridor all the way down to the application site with associated junction improvements at Minster Road, High Street, Garlinge. And then obviously at the application site end, you've got the two roads forking off, one between Shottendane Road and Hartsdown Road, and Shottendane Road and Manston Road. And that dovetails in nicely with the application that came before you recently for development on the site between Nash Road and Manston Road, which will also provide a new link road. As sites come forward, Nash Road itself will be upgraded. There'll be a requirement for all of these roads to be delivered to a local distributor standard. So local distributor standard basically means wide enough to accommodate all types of traffic that might use them. They will include footways, cycleways, and will be high quality infrastructure, and will hopefully provide a much needed additional amount of connectivity between the settlements within Thanet. In terms of the application site, a key part of the local plan and Thanet transport strategy is the resilience, and this provides it around the Coffin House Corner junction through the delivery of on-site infrastructure and financial contributions which have been outlined within the officer's report. The traffic modelling, so in terms of the plan you've got on the screen there, the two link roads will basically enable traffic to bypass, some of the traffic to bypass the Coffin House Corner junction. So anyone coming along Shottendane Road, for example, that currently has to come down and turn left along Hartsdown Road will no longer need to do that because they can use the Northern Link Road. Anybody coming from Hartsdown Road towards Coffin House Corner and they want to access Westwood Cross will be able to use the new link roads to effectively bypass the congestion you get at the moment at the Coffin House Corner junction, and use the new upgrade. In time, we'll be able to use the new upgraded Nash Road corridor. As part of the other application on the Nash Road, Manston Road site, there will be a reconfiguration of the Coffin House Corner junction. So the Nash Road arm will be stopped up. Traffic will be forced along the new link road. What that basically enables us to do is to look at the configuration of the Coffin House Corner junction and optimise the amount of traffic that you can get through there, and potentially provide a better pedestrian experience as well near the school. The traffic modelling that we undertook to support the local plan concludes that the inner circuit as a whole will provide much needed resilience within the local road network. It won't eradicate all the existing traffic pressure within the districts, but it does provide that resilience, which was the main theme of the strategy. The local junctions, everybody knows that that's a very busy junction there at Coffin House Corner. It's always going to be busy. It does provide a distributor route for a lot of the traffic within the district. But what this plan will do will help manage that growth so it doesn't get exponentially worse. Clearly, the delivery of the inner circuit as a whole is quite an ambitious plan, but I think it's something that's really needed for Thanet. Generally got a strong level of support locally. I think the old saying of like Rome wasn't built in a day really applies here in terms of the inner circuit. There's various pieces of the jigsaw that need to be provided, but they need to come forward as and when each strategic site comes forward through a combination of on-site infrastructure and financial contributions, enabling the county council to deliver off-site improvements along the Shottendane Road corridor and the other sections outside of the curtilage of the development sites. It wouldn't be realistic to expect the whole inner circuit to be delivered on day one, but it's essential that any funding that we do secure towards the off-site sections of the inner circuit need to be done on a flexible basis. So we need to be able to evolve. There's a local plan review coming up. We need any contributions that are secured to be able to be used towards this iteration of the inner circuit, or any changes in planning circumstances that might happen across the plan period. So we've hopefully secured that through the planning obligations that are outlined within the report. To speed up the delivery of the transport strategy, some members may have heard in the news that we've got an external funding bid currently in track through the Major Road Network Fund. I think the applicant statement mentioned the MRN funding stream. So just to give you a little bit of an outline as to what is encompassed within the MRN bid. So Major Road Network Fund is a specific fund from the Department for Transport to help to manage traffic congestion and pressure on the major road network. Now the A28 is part of that network, so this fund is specifically focused towards the A28 corridor and what we can do to alleviate congestion or to manage growth in the future. In terms of what it includes the link road, new junction onto the A28, where the Birchington site would be, the new link road coming across to Acole Hill, the new upgraded link of Manston Road between Acole Hill and Shottendane Road, the Columbus Avenue extension, which provides you almost an Acole bypass as such, upgrades to the existing Shottendane Road corridor up to the application site, and then obviously the two link roads within the application site as well. So that it's quite key in terms. There was a mention of viability earlier and affordable housing provision. The provision of external funding will have provide a big boost to the viability potentially on this site, and we're obviously exploring additional funding streams as and when they come on track. So in essence, it's really essential that the allocated housing sites continue to be delivered in Thanet, because that will bolster match funding for these types of bids, and will only bolster the chances of those bids being accepted by central government. However, obviously we can't be completely reliant upon a major road network fund, and for a sound local plan you have to have infrastructure that can be delivered on its own steam. So in the absence of the major road network funding stream, we will explore additional funding streams from elsewhere, but the default position is that the inner circuit needs to be secured through the strategic development sites, and they need to fund it all. So when you look at this development site in isolation, it will lead to increases and decreases on the local highway network. Mentioned earlier about the redistribution of traffic, that there are certain traffic movements that won't have to go through the Coffin House Corner network. Obviously, delivery of these two new link roads will make Shottendane Road a slightly more attractive proposition for people, because they won't necessarily, all of the people that are travelling on Shottendane Road won't necessarily get stuck at the Coffin House Corner junction, where there's a little bit of a delay in traffic movements through there at the moment. There's likely to be a net decrease at Coffin House Corner when this application actually comes in. That's because obviously you're taking away potential movements that would go through there. So there'll be a small decrease in traffic through the Coffin House Corner junction, but obviously that will get soaked up by additional development when it comes forward, sort of later on for some of the other strategic developments. There will be a small increase in traffic in Victoria traffic signals, and on a few of the other junctions. But obviously the delivery of these two link roads will help to manage some of the traffic conditions within the A28 corridor. And I think we really do need to look at this holistically and on balance. So obviously looking at the application at the moment, I would recommend the site needs to be considered within the context of the transport strategy. The interim impacts that the development will generate aren't considered to be objectionable, particularly as proportionate funding towards the inner circuit has been secured as part of the application as outlined in the officer's report, and there's flexibility in how we can apply that funding in the future if we need to. If we can move on to the next slide. So this slide shows you the proposed new junction. This is on the Northern Link Road on the Hartsdown Road side. So on Hartsdown Road, there will be a requirement for a right turn lane. So what will the right turn lane will do is it will allow traffic to queue to wait to turn right without impeding existing traffic on the Hartsdown Road network. The reason why we've gone for a right turn lane here is because you're unlikely to get that many right turners out of that junction because anybody travelling along the Hartsdown Road, the Shottendale Road corridor will obviously continue along that corridor and unlike to go down the Link Road and turn right. The link roads themselves, they're earmarked at 6.7 metres wide minimum, although obviously that's a reserve matter. The actual standard of the road will be clarified through the reserve matters and secured through that, but there's an expectation there will be a cycleway on one side, a footway on the other. The road will be wide enough for buses and larger vehicles to use in accordance with the requirement for the inner circuit for it to be to local distributor standard. If we can move on to the next slide. So this shows the central roundabout on Shottendale Road. So it's a 4-arm roundabout. Modelling has been done on this to show that in the 2027 scenario, which has been done for the development site, it operates with plenty of spare capacity, so should take us through to easily to 2031, end of local plan. There is the documentation that was provided with the application did show that there is an element of speeding that takes place on this section of Shottendale Road. It's quite a wide corridor and a 30-mile-an-hour limit at the moment. Hopefully, we would expect this new road feature to help manage those speeds on that link. Next slide, if possible. And then on to Manston Road, that would be a 3-arm roundabout. Again, the junction capacity has been checked there. All of these junctions have been subject to independent road safety audits. So that basically means the road safety auditor has to assess the designs and comment on them. So we're satisfied with the responses to those road safety audits. And as Annabelle has outlined, Ms. Simmons has outlined, we've also got the safeguarding of the additional land on Shottendale Road to facilitate flexibility over the improvements to the remaining off-site sections of Shottendale Road in the future. So in summary, we're satisfied that the proposed development will positively contribute towards the strategic aims of the transport strategy, and on balance, the residual traffic impacts from the development aren't considered to be severe in our view.
Thank you, James. I'm just going to outline to members some points to do with viability and planning obligations, and then I'll sum up. So I do appreciate that that the presentation has gone on to just give all the details to members. So in terms of planning obligations, the report outlines at page 67 onwards about planning obligations and the heads of terms for this particular application. So the allocated, one of the site's sort of key features, as mentioned, is the strategic infrastructure, and that policy requires that proportionate contributions must be made to off-site highways infrastructure from the strategic allocated sites. As well as that, and obviously one of the key policies that's discussed at length is policy SP23, which is that the target of 30% of all dwellings on site should be affordable for a development of this sort of scale. The specific policy criteria does state that can be reduced if meeting those requirements that requirement would make the development unviable. So a viability assessment was submitted with the application. This was assessed by Dixon Searle, who did our whole plan viability work for the local plan. They also did the work on the Minster housing site, which came before members last week, where following the assessment that was made by both officers and the independent assessment, the council successfully agreed that 30% should be provided on that site following the information being assessed and submitted. Now, this site is different from other sites. Very specifically, we've gone through the specific constraints that this site has and the additional abnormal costs. But it's also not a situation that I know members are concerned about, which we've had in the past come to planning committee, specifically with regards to the Salmston Grange development that you can see on the right hand side here, but also the Manston Green development. This is not a situation where we've already come to planning committee and the site has promised 30% affordable and then we're coming back to look at a reduction. This was very clearly and transparently put up front as that there is a viability issue with this site due to the topography, the drainage, the highway costs, which then lead to a reduction in the number of units that the site can provide. So the annexes to the report include the actual viability assessments that have been carried out and the back and forth as well. These are reviewed in page 68 of the report. So the case that's put forward is for 10% affordable housing with an 80-20 split, as mentioned earlier, with 4.9 million in total for contributions covering a variety of matters to do with community and highways infrastructure, as well as specific mitigation towards the SAMs. In terms of the actual detail of the viability appraisal, I'm just going to briefly touch on a summary. The gross development value has been assessed. One of the concerns that was raised is when that gross development value was assessed in terms of house prices. The assessment occurred towards the end of last year, so it was submitted in July, but the actual assessment was done towards the end of last year. And I'll go into one of the particular requirements that's put in the heads of terms about a review mechanism, which will look at if values do go up and how that will increase the provision of contributions. The costs, the developer costs, particularly with regards to this site, have been looked at in a lot of detail with an independent QS report separate from the independent review of viability being done and looked into because of those abnormal engineering costs and highways costs that have come forward. The level of developer profit is considered to be in accordance with the requirements that we've put on all of our strategic allocations of 17.5% of gross development value. And on the basis of this evidence, which has been looked at in a lot of detail and considering specifically the MPPG guidance, it is recommended that the viability evidence should be given significant weight and that the site would be, as the policy requires the assessment of it, would be unviable with more than the stated amount of affordable housing and the contributions. So on those contributions, of the 4.9 million, it is proposed to ring fence the contribution towards the strategic access management monitoring plan. So that's the mitigation for the impact on the designated sites at Thanet Coast and Pegwell area, but also to ring fence the specific contribution towards healthcare that's already been mentioned, which has been requested specifically by the CCG on their specific methodology to calculate what the contribution should be from a residential development, and that's 388,000 ring fenced for that purpose. The rest of the money to be provided on a per unit basis, up to a total of 4.3 million approximately, is to be collected into an infrastructure pot to be used towards the identified projects that are outlined on page 72 of the report upon agreement between TDC and KCC. So the money comes to TDC as local planning authority and can be used on a flexible basis towards those specific projects when they are most needed, because certain projects can come forward at different times. Obviously, it's been mentioned about external funding and when that maybe needs to be applied for highway infrastructure, as well as when money is needed to provide, for example, the new secondary school in Margate. It is considered that this contribution package is sufficient to mitigate the impact of development and to be in accordance with policy SP 41 of the local plan. But obviously, this is an outline application, so it is important that whilst we're agreeing a position now, there is the potential that things could change into the future. And obviously what's been touched on already is about the major road network funding, as well as potential that values go up and costs go down. On on that basis, it is considered appropriate and necessary for two specific review mechanisms within the Section 106 based specifically on site viability to secure part of the surplus, any surplus that's created, part of that when the values go up and costs go down, that money is secured towards off-site affordable housing. There are two trigger points for that for that assessment. One is prior to the occupation of the 200th dwelling on the site, and another one would be prior to the occupation of the 400th dwelling on the site. Sales values that actually come out of the scheme. And as already mentioned, KCC have a live bid for major road network funding with the Department of Transport. That funding, if it comes to pass, would pay for the majority of costs of the roundabouts and the road upgrades within this site, with some match funding needed from the developer. And therefore, we need a review mechanism so that if the grant comes in and KCC provide these roads, that the money saved by the developer comes to the council to be spent on the projects that are outlined in the heads of terms, including off-site affordable housing, as well as other off-site highway infrastructure, education, and so on, as outlined. This plan in front of you shows the indicative phasing plan that's proposed for the development. So you'll see that the green here is 1A, which includes the junction on Hartsdown Road, as well as the roundabout on Shottendane Road, to be provided within the first phase of the scheme, with the roundabout on Manston Road being provided in the second, 1B phase of the scheme. Now, there is a plan that requires a highways works phasing plan specifically to come in to look at the precise timing of when these junction works and these new roads need to be provided, linked to the occupancy of the units. They're in conditions 20 and 21. And just to, it obviously does include then the later phases here, which includes the last bit of the Shottendane Road, and obviously the safeguarded land that's in this area in the last phase, if it comes forward and is necessary by KCC. So in conclusion, the site is an allocated housing site. It's required to deliver housing and infrastructure as a key part of the Thanet local plan strategy. The applicant has designed around the constraints of this site, looking at surface water drainage, archaeology, the required highways links, providing open space adjacent to heritage assets, as well as safeguarding particular land as necessary. And that has led to a reduction in the number of units that's proposed to 450. The scheme shows an enhancement to the biodiversity potential of this site above existing, and that's been agreed and commented on by KCC Biodiversity, as well as dealing with surface water flooding, and that has been agreed by KCC as the lead flood authority. Planning obligations have been looked at in a lot of detail on this application, and the 10% affordable housing, which has been clearly evidenced, will provide social benefit as well as the pot. And it is considered there are specific reasons why we can agree it at this level. I do not agree that it actually would lead to a assumption that this is a normal case of events. It's always looked at very specifically, and that's just demonstrated by last week when we were talking about Minster, when it was secured at 30%, even with the submissions that were made for less. And fundamentally, this development site does provide key infrastructure in the district, which does need to be given significant weight, as well as providing allocated housing when the council is in a presumption in favour of sustainable development. And therefore, the application is recommended to be deferred for approval, and that's subject to receipt of the Section 106, specifically providing the required heads of terms as outlined in the report, and with the safeguarded conditions imposed on the decision, which are at the top of the agenda item. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Just like to thank all officers and KCC as well. A very detailed report there for members. As usual, I'm going to recommend that the officer's recommendation is adopted. Could the Vice Chair please second?
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Coleman Cook. I have speakers. No, Councillor Alban's been on there since just after 6 o'clock. But it's your turn now, Councillor Alban.
Thank you, Chair. Two things. One, I've got a question, and I'd like to ask that first. Can the officers advise if the developer owns the land, please?
Can I come back to Ian on that, or?
I believe the developer has an option on the land to buy the land. As for ownership, I would have to double check the application form, but I believe it's an option on the land specifically.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Reason I asked that, Chair, is obviously if the developers are submitting an application on land that they don't own, then the landowner, which can happen and does happen, then the landowner can obviously then refuse them the right to build on the land. So that's just one thing. My comments, Chair, are that I think we need to consider the human cost of this. Whilst it's clear that within the local plan, this area of land is designated for housing, and the council has approved that. So it's not what should be built. It's, as Mr. Livingston said, it's how it should be actually built, and the effect of that on our community. The effects of it for me is I am extremely disheartened in relation to a 10% affordable housing. I know Mr. Livingston has outlined the reasons why. However, my view is that it is unacceptable. It's clear policy, 30% affordable housing, and if they can't afford that and to build it, then don't build the development. I also have concerns about the highway issues. Whilst it's good to see the roundabouts to go in and the routes through the actual development site, Mr. Wright has clearly said that it's not going to really alleviate in any major way the Coffin House corner issues. You know, I've regularly gone down Manston Road from Ramsgate into Margate, and especially on a weekend, and to get out of Manston Road to get onto Shottendane Road and then go further now, you know, I've been stuck there half an hour when there's only been approximately 20 cars trying to get out of Manston Road into Shottendane Road. And on top of this, obviously, we're going to have 450 houses with all that traffic that it demands. There, of course, is a social impact of this development upon the area, and that relates to what two of our fellow councillors have raised in relation to the health issues. That again should concern us all about the weight of that, about the weight that's put on our surgeries. As some of us know, sometimes it takes 2 weeks to get an appointment. But whilst you may say that that's not really relevant to this development, it is. All developments cause these issues. Also, large developments that the government are requiring us to actually have, and let's not forget that, the government have said that we've got to have these amount of houses in our area. And we are now taking up arable land for our area to put these houses upon. We all find that difficult, but unfortunately the government is making us do this. It doesn't sit comfortable with us. You know, we don't actually want to do it, but we're left with no alternative in relation to these sites being confirmed as housing sites. So in principle, we should actually approve this because it's a housing development site. They come up with less than the 550 houses to go on the site that's shown that it could be. And in principle, we should support that. However, I cannot support it in relation to both the affordable housing and to the effects of what I can see to be on the road transport network. Because as Mr. Rate says, this isn't going to happen overnight. This is going to take some while to actually take place. And the impacts of that upon our local roads and which will affect the air quality, which will affect local businesses, etc., is not good enough for me. So, Chairman, my view is that I cannot support this application as is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Before I bring in Mr. Livingston, I've got to say this, members who have spoken on 20.1, and thank you, Councillor Rozeski, for pointing this out, I would ask you not to comment on the chat line. Totally understand your feelings, and obviously you had the opportunity earlier, but the chat line is for members of the committee and officers. If you could please accept that. Thank you. Councillor Hart. Sorry, Ian, you wanted to come back.
Sorry, thank you, Chair, and I appreciate you letting me come back after a long presentation. I just wanted to pick up a couple of points because that Councillor Orban's raised. One relates to the first point is about 10% affordable housing. Obviously, we've provided the detailed information that both submitted by the applicant and also the report that's been provided by the independent consultants that we use. And it is important to consider that evidence in coming to a decision about whether or not to accept less than the 30%. And it's understood that that is always difficult. And as I've outlined to this committee a number of times, we will always look to seek the absolute maximum that is possible. But there are situations where sites cannot come forward with a 30% affordable contribution. I mean, I'll give an example of one. It's not in this district that came before a planning committee in a neighbouring district in Canterbury very recently for an allocated housing site for 630 houses, providing 8 million odd towards a link road. Where 0% affordable housing was provided, and that was agreed and approved, and it was on the basis of the evidence that's there. Now, we're in Thanet and we want to get as much affordable housing as possible, and it is always important that we assess in a lot of detail the evidence that's been provided, but we have to give it weight when considering whether or not the development should be allowed or not at less than the policy requirement. And in this instance, officers have put it forward on the basis of an approval. If the amount of affordable housing were to go up, that deducts money for the other contributions with regards to this scheme. It has been demonstrated quite clearly it would be unviable any more contributions or with more affordable housing. And it is obviously, as mentioned, an allocated site, which does bring forward needed housing in the district. There are the review mechanisms which are very specifically in there to try and capture any improvements. I might want to just bring in James with regards to the road network point, if that's okay. But just on my side of things, it's important that the highway infrastructure that's being proposed on this site in the long term would, again, give that network resilience that's important in the local plan in terms of the strategy of how all these housing sites get delivered. But it is about this scheme and this number of houses. Does the provision of highway works that's been provided support this development of 450 houses to ensure that these 450 units do not have a severe impact on the highway network? And in the view of KCC, not wanting to put words in your mouth, it wouldn't result in a severe harm to the network. So it's not going to be considered from the officer's view to be a reason for refusal that would stand up in an appeal situation. And I did want to pick up one point about air quality because we didn't cover it in the presentation, but there is a lot of work again that's gone into air quality. There was an air quality assessment that was submitted with the application. It's been looked at by the environmental health team. We are requiring an emissions mitigation assessment to be provided prior to the reserve matters, which will outline a combination of measures, including damage costs that need to be spent on site to improve air quality. There are electric vehicle charging points, and there are very specific grasslands that are being proposed within the ecology and landscaping plan, specifically to offset nitrogen from cars. So we do consider that point particularly has been dealt with. James, I don't know whether or not you've got any comments on the highway side of things.
Yeah, I'll come in on that. Perhaps I wasn't clear enough in my presentation regarding this site specifically on its own merits. If you look at this site, it's 450 dwellings. It will generate, in general, around 260 movements. That's comings and goings combined on the local road network. There's five potential routes out from the development site on the local network, so it will distribute out onto a number of routes within the local network. The modelling that was done to support the application does suggest that there would be, I say, a positive impact at the Coffin House Corner junction, because the delivery of the link roads will take traffic off. So obviously in time, there'll be more growth within the local plan that comes forward, and that will soak up that capacity that's released by this site. But if you're simply looking at this site on its own merits, on its own, and taking it to an appeal, I think you'd find it very difficult to actually demonstrate that on balance, when you take into account all the benefits that the development provides and the proportionate contribution towards the wider strategy, and the fact that the adopted transport strategy clearly says that resilience is, one of the key drivers for the Thanet road network moving forward, I think you'd find it very difficult to defend that position. And that, obviously this issue in terms of the local plan, the inspector did consider the infrastructure delivery plan, and this was a clear part of that, and was satisfied that it was a sound plan. So I would encourage members to consider that when they're making their decision.
Thank you for that, James. Councillor Hart.
Thank you, Chair. It's been a very interesting and informative meeting, and I think it's been done very well by the officers involved. I do have a few comments and a few things to say. I'm concerned about, I read in, and I don't understand it, Ian, so you will have to explain it to me. It had on page, page 38, something called colluvium, which I have had to have a lot of look into because I had no idea what that was. And that was to do with the movement of land, and therefore it travels down the site. And so therefore it's basically filling in a riverbed or whatever, can be used as another way, but I think that's alluvium. I'm not too sure. I got a bit confused on it. Now, I don't know if that's historic. I don't know if it's continual. I don't know if the buildings that will go on will have to then be on stilts. And I don't know if that will affect the whole site in any way, shape or form. One assumes it may do because it's going to travel down the sides of the field into the middle, which is what I assume happens. Now, also, I would like to know what's going to happen with Tivoli Brook. Can they ensure that that is still going to run properly and not be blocked by the developments? Is it going to alleviate the flooding that we always have at Tivoli Woods? And I mean enormous flooding. You know that as well as I do. It goes right across the road sometimes. I also am concerned about, this is more about, in my opinion, bringing in the strategic road network rather than building houses. And where are these loss of 100 houses supposed to then be built? Because obviously, if it's supposed to be designed for 550 and you're now getting 450, where are those extra houses going to be built? No idea at all. So that's an issue for me in this whole plan. And I am concerned about the medical situation as well as everybody else, because it was on the TV today, very highlighted, that Thanet is one of the greatest places nobody wants to work. No idea why, because I love Thanet, absolutely love Thanet. I think it's a wonderful place to work. And they can't get GPs. Well, if you can't get GPs and you can't get doctors in the hospital, how the hell are these people going to be looked after? And with regards to James Rate's comment about they only expect 200 movements a day from a 450 house development, I find a bit far-fetched. I think most people will leave their house at least once a day if they've been stuck indoors or either to go to work. So I find that a bit strange. And by the time this is built, we're going to be so close to 2031 that everything will have changed anyway. So I think the projections he's putting forward are a little bit askewed. But they're my main concern at the moment. And it's basically a car-dependent area. I mean, you're not going to put buses in to pick these up and that up. I can't see that happening. So it's going to be a car-dependent site. Again, like the one in Minster, it's car-dependent. And I think that we have to look into this situation because everybody who is going to live there is going to need a car, probably two. And is there enough associated parking and road network for two cars per household? At least two cars per household. But they're my main movement points to put forward. So if you can answer those, Ian, I'll be most grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hart. I'll come to Ian first, and I know James would like to speak as well. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. So just coming back on going through the points. So one of the things that the Reserve Matters applications will do is provide the detail of how these properties themselves get built, how they actually sit on a section of the land, because, you know, given what we've talked about in terms of the level change and the amount of excavation that you're potentially going to have to need for the road, how that's going to fit in terms of land levels. And it is going to be key for the Reserve Matters to look at that. And obviously in terms of structural stability, that is something that clearly comes through the building rig side of the system with regards to making sure that, again, whether or not, you know, what foundations are required and those sorts of things. The main points obviously relate to, and that obviously links to this, it relates to flooding. In terms of the points about that, the model that they've used for surface water drainage specifically is looking at the existing flows, looking at the fact that, you know, it's acknowledged that there is existing surface water flows. And what this is doing is, again, it's making sure that from adding the development onto this site, you are not increasing those flows from this scheme. And the provision of the attenuation basin that's being provided, it's 836 cubic meters of an attenuation basin, is one of the key elements of that at the lowest point in the site where everything drains into. It's very important that cases the local lead flood authority have been involved in this, because what they've asked for, which is enshrined in condition 20, is condition 13, is about no development taking place on any phase until a specific drainage scheme has been provided, showing all the principles of what's been provided in the flood risk assessment, to ensure that there isn't additional runoff from this site onto any sites outside the red line. And specifically, condition 15 is for a verification report to be looked at to assess whether or not all the surface water drainage, all the systems are in place, they're all working well before any dwellings are occupied in any individual phase. So these are all issues that have been looked at specifically by consultees and would be enshrined in the planning conditions that are here. In terms of the 100 house deficit, this site itself, in our view, cannot provide the 550, because what you would do is you would end up building on effectively a safeguarded archaeological exclusion area, and you wouldn't be able to build on the areas where there are surface water drainage flows coming through the site. In terms of where these 100 houses will be needed to be found, obviously there is a windfall allowance within the local plan provision in terms of what can be found in the urban area. Sites can come forward that obviously the local don't come through the local plan, and they can be within the urban confines. And obviously, if that happens, then obviously that will contribute towards the total of making up for the shortfall on this site. There is a specific comment about this in the report by the strategic plans manager that basically takes this point up as a point that has been looked at again because of that shortfall. And before I pass over to James with regards to the movements point, in terms of the medical situation, obviously we have secured, or will secure through this application, a provision of a financial contribution, which is what the NHS and CCG have requested. I understand the specific concerns that members have with regards to provision of GPs, but planning applications, and this has been alluded to by Councillor Orban, planning applications cannot physically get more GPs through development and applications like this. It's about it is obviously a complex and connected matter, but fundamentally what a local planning site like this has to do is ensure that there are suitable contributions or mitigation from the development towards the development of the facilities, the physical infrastructure. And in this instance, that has been provided in accordance with what the NHS CCG have requested. So we have provided what they have specifically requested. And so again, whilst it is regrettable that more can't be done in this process to provide for, to provide additional GPs, it's not something that in itself would stand up as an opposition to this planning application as a material planning consideration. So sorry, James, I'll bring you in again if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, you're quite right, Councillor Hart. I probably wasn't being detailed enough in what I said to you. It's 260 movements, but I fell into the trap of talking in transport consultant speak. That's in the peak hour, so that's the peak hour flow, not the whole day. So in terms of your sort of question mark about the amount of traffic that the development will generate, that will be the worst peak hour. I think what we need to consider, though, is the modelling that's been done for the local plan does assume the absolute worst case scenario. Moving forward, if you have, I used to live near a school, near Garlinge School, actually, in Thanet, and I would never come out of my house and make a vehicle trip in the school peaks. I know how bad it gets down near St Gregory's School in the peaks through there. And what will happen in reality is people will sort of train their trips as such. So they will time their trips. It's generally a sort of 20 to 25 minute sort of peak hour where you get the bulk of the traffic congestion from the on-street parking around the school. And what will happen in reality is people will avoid those times where they can. And also in terms of the forecast, they're based upon trip forecasts that are derived nationally, and they were done post sort of pre-COVID. So obviously moving forward, there may well be a reduction in trips as a result of the new way of working that people have had since COVID kicked in. Lots more people working from home now, lots more people working flexibly. So in terms of the modelling outputs within the transport assessment and the local plan evidence base, it is really going to be worst case scenario. And the hope is that there will actually be a lot less traffic on the network than the modelling shows. But we want to make sure that we've done a robust job of ensuring that all the necessary infrastructure is in place. And also in terms of like the transport strategy, just to sort of kick on from there, it is quite important to consider the fact that the transport strategy will provide those sustainable links as well. So somebody mentioned earlier about the site not being particularly sustainable. Well, it's quite near a junior school, quite relatively near a secondary school, but the inner circuit provision and the on-site provision within the site will provide cycling and walking links where there aren't any at the moment. So moving forward, you really have got that good opportunity to really kick in with travel planning, and that will also assist in managing the traffic impact in the future.
Thanks, James, for that. I do have quite a few speakers, so if you have put your name in the chat line, I haven't forgotten you, and as mentioned before, if I do miss you, you'll shout at me. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. I will obviously start by just saying thank you for the detailed reports going forwards. Obviously taking on board what the planning report has gone forward, and obviously our speakers with regards to the planning. I do somewhat echo some of the comments already being made by Councillor Alban and Councillor Hart. So, sort of to go over those again, they've already been addressed. Obviously, the slight dismay with the affordable housing allocations and obviously healthcare provisions, etc. I did actually want to touch more on to the flood planning, and if I could be so kind to ask if we're able to bring up that flood plan map, because I'm very I know the area quite well, and I know that particular area is very high risk of flooding, having sort of cycled past there many a times when we have had large amounts of water is a nice little splash to come down onto. I mean, I think Ian's already answered some of the question I wanted to actually put forward, which was obviously how the flooding assessment is put forwards. And obviously it's looked on historically with that, and do correct me if I'm wrong here, with the intention of how it's going to be planned onto an actual housing development model. Obviously, one of the biggest and most natural sort of elements of drainage is our fields, our natural agricultural fields. They tend to soak up a large volume of water. So obviously bricks and mortar and tarmac do tend to have a more significant impact and obviously allow more sort of a surface flooding. I mean, so that's my concern. I was wondering if we are able to approach that, because I did want to question the estimate in percentage of the flood risk in Area A. Because looking at the phase 1 development, which is potentially 134 dwellings, I do wonder that a large number of those will be affected. And I know we are meant to be obviously addressing the types of development, obviously with the local plan and the large number of members who approve such a plan. Basically, I mean, I'm starting to think that this type of development for phase 1 will be boathouses with this sort of flood. So, yeah, I'm a bit concerned with that particular area, the actual flood risk in general. So yeah, just to sort of outline my questions again is, what is the estimate percentage of the flood risk in Area A? If we can just bring that map up again, obviously affecting the phase 1. And my next question was moving on to sort of looking a bit more into this, is the Southern Water highlighted this being an issue. And what caught my eye was apparently a feature, which was the drainage system to be actually within the planning. It's quite a large feature, if you want to call it a feature. And again, I mean, obviously, I don't know if it's quite desirable to live next to a potential, on-site drainage system. And if we can have a bit more information on that, what type of development of that drainage system will be, or if I'm even right into saying if it is going to be an on-site drainage system. I think it's something I read within the report of Southern Water. And obviously, again, how that will affect potential noise, light pollution, and again, the viability of that particular plan and the impact of the people who will be, no doubt, living there. So hopefully I've made myself a bit clear. Again, I'm a bit of a garbler, so thank you.
I'm not saying a word, Councillor Scott, but I will pass you if Ian can come back on that.
Yes, thank you. I would have to dig into the flood risk assessment specifically with regards to percentage risk. It's not quite quantified in that way. What's looked at normally when planning out developments is to plan for developments of a particular storm event within a particular section of years. So, for example, planning for a 1 in 100 storm event, which is obviously a massive storm event, and for certain areas of the site, planning for, say, a 1 in 30 year event, which obviously comes around every 30 years. So again, it's a little bit less, but obviously still quite significant. If I may, Chair, I will just present my screen back to everyone to just show the particular map and how that links into the development, if that's okay.
Yes, by all means, yes.
So this is the drainage plan that's been mentioned. So sorry, not the drainage plan. This is the surface water flooding mapping that's been done using the model by the applicant. So you can see that the dark areas here are the high risk areas from the flooding that's occurring, that would occur across the site in terms of the existing surface water flows. So what the aim of the drainage strategy that's been put forward is effectively how you channel the existing flows, ensure that all new development channels into the existing flows, but also then attenuates the speed of runoff to ensure that you are able to hold the water on site and effectively to infiltrate it at a rate that means you don't result in flooding on sites around there or indeed to the residential properties. So if I'm just going to skim through very quickly to get to this plan here. And Annabelle talked a bit about this. One of the things that's going to have to be submitted, as I mentioned in response earlier to Councillor Hart, is a surface water drainage scheme for each individual phase, but looking at a site-wide basis. And that will be based on the specific elements that are put forward in the flood risk assessment. And so that is to provide effectively the route through the site that would provide still that those flows could still occur, because they're obviously occurring at the moment, through the green open space. And that's obviously dictated how that is. And obviously these are on extreme events in terms of flooding and when they would occur, as well as making sure that the highway network is provided to be resilient for storm events of 1 in 30 years, with then the specific SUDS feature that's being proposed, which is actually providing this attenuation basin here, which obviously, as I mentioned earlier, is to take 836 cubic meters. So it's very, it's an element that's looked at in a lot of detail, specifically by the lead flood authority, KCC, in terms of looking at, well, can you actually plan for, can you get this number of houses on there? Can you make sure that you don't result in flooding on the site from surface water that would cause issues with these properties themselves? And obviously that is why planning conditions are put on there for this information to come in. And effectively, there is always a solution to dealing with issues of flooding, but it may obviously increase in cost depending on how things are going. That's why this site has already accommodated some of those costs within the viability assessment work. But as well as that, it's obviously something that must be verified. It must be agreed that actually what's been put on site works, to ensure that it doesn't result in anything before anyone can occupy the properties. And that is actually, it's a relatively new condition that we're now putting on applications when they have surface water drainage issues like this. And it isn't fully endorsed by KCC. You've mentioned with regards to Southern Water specifically about the issue of drainage. Obviously, Southern Water are primarily with regards to sewage and foul water. And I must admit, I think it'd be worth just touching on this, because I know it's always a concern for developments of any sort of scale, really, about how does the foul water capacity work for this sort of thing. We have got a condition, again, it's a Grampian condition requiring details of the site-wide drainage infrastructure to be provided. Southern Water haven't objected, but obviously they've raised a number of informatives that they've requested we put on any permission that's granted. But it is actually obviously part of the Water Infrastructure Act that allows for a developer or a house builder to connect to the network, but it's for Southern Water to dictate the connection cost, which is then to deal with, that cost is to deal with the network resilience and make sure there is sufficient capacity there. So it's actually dealt with outside the planning system. For planning sense, it's to ensure that it doesn't result in potentially pollution to the area, because inadequate drainage, no doubt, obviously can lead to pollution. And we are in an area that we need to ensure that there is only very controlled infiltration to the ground because of course of where it is with regards to the aquifer. So we do consider that these issues have been looked at in sufficient detail for outline, but there will be more detail that will be needed to be looked at, including by the professional expertise of the consultees as the development would come forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I see Councillor Scott, very briefly, Councillor Scott.
Yep. Appreciate it. Okay, yeah, I think you have answered again, Ian. So I think I have made a mistake of just mixing the two up. So am I to understand that the planning there with that the feature that is essentially, for less of a better word, a ditch for the excess water to go to? I mean, I suppose it would be better than that. And obviously the information where I've read about Southern Water and its own sewage system is not related to that. Just for clarification, if you may.
Yeah, so the basin, I'll refer to it as a basin rather than a ditch, but it's a relevant point actually, because how aesthetically it looks is something that needs very close attention when it comes to planning. And again, this is why it's part of the landscaping scheme and why it will need further submissions. And indeed, that's what the reserve matters is for. But yes, Southern Water are primarily interested in sewage in terms of the drainage network, the underground network. And obviously, the local lead flood authority of KCC are looking at the surface water flow specifically. And that in this site is the particular concern with regards to flooding.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you very much for that. Always very interesting, the Tivoli Brook. Councillor Garner.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you to the officers who've obviously spent a lot of time preparing this application for presentation to us this evening. It's appreciated. I will just start by saying I do appreciate, one of the things I appreciate as well is that because of the reduction in housing numbers, that has led to an improved biodiversity proposal in the application. But I do have a number of quite significant concerns about this application. They have been mentioned by a number of other members of the committee, but I do want to reiterate a couple of points that I'm concerned about. Firstly, Councillor Gregory and Councillor Farrance and others raised some significant concerns about sort of woefully inadequate contribution to the CCG of 388,000. That sort of goes on top of the existing health worker shortage in the area around Thanet. And I do think, as well as needing to recognise that in this application, there is some work I think we need to do as an authority to work with the CCG to make sure we put provision in to try and encourage more health workers to come and work in the area. Because we know there's going to be an increase in housing in Thanet, and we need to be thinking about how we can attract health workers to come and work in this area. I also have a concern, share the concerns raised by Councillor Boyd and others around the loss of green spaces and agricultural land. And of course, there was also mentioned in the presentation loss of some of the existing trees in the area. But I think my main concern on top of those relates to the issues raised also by Councillor Farrance and a number of other residents around the actual suitability of this land itself for housing to be built. We saw on the flood map earlier that, you know, that I'm no expert, and I will obviously listen to experts, but it doesn't look like the land is suitable for any significant housing at all to be built on it. And I think that sort of had then that knock-on impact on the amount of affordable housing that's going to be provided in this development of 10%. I mean, I know, yes, there's been an impact assessment and there's evidence been provided that to justify that significant reduction in affordable housing, but I really do struggle, like a number of other of us, to accept that. And I think that we've heard in previous meetings that you know, affordable housing really is needed and is important. And if this application can't provide that, then I think we really have to think very seriously about whether or not we can approve this application. And just before I finish, I would like to ask one question, please, just for confirmation about something, really. If this application is approved, similar to the one that was approved last week, there will be, can you just confirm that there will be there is an opportunity to bring the Reserved Matters application back before us for this planning committee to consider before it would be finally approved? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garner. Ian, I think I know what the answer is there, but would you like to comment on that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, is the answer. Yeah, any reserved matters can be called in. If members do consider it and this application is approved, we have in the past agreed that actually with certain sites that we would automatically bring the reserved matters back to planning committee, which does happen in rare occasions. Obviously, in this instance, I would imagine, given the quite reasonable amount of interest in this site, that we would look to bring back reserve matters applications, and indeed that they'll be called in. But yes, they were likely to be heard before this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Rosecki.
Thank you, Chair. Interesting presentation, and thank you, Ian, and your staff for that. Excellently put forward. I, like all the other councillors that have spoken, are of the same opinion in the sense that affordable housing is a big issue for us, and we do need to protect that as much as possible. I do understand what Ian has said, and that it's been addressed with the formulas, etc. And I appreciate that it's probably not a reason that we can refuse it. The medical issues, yes, I understand again. I think really all the issues that I have listed down here have been brought forward by other councillors and has been explained, but it's a very tough decision on this one. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rosecki. Councillor Paulmore.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Firstly, thank you to all the officers for their report. It was very concise and very informative. I agree with all my fellow committee members in what's been said, and so I'm not going to go over old ground on that respect. But I do have one query. If this is for approval, deferred approval, will that mean that the officers will make the decision, or it will come back to committee? Because that's my concern. And at the moment, I'm very much in favour, as Councillor Alban said. I want to see housing. We know it's got to be housing, but in its present format, outline planning, that doesn't sit comfortably with me either, because anything can change, as we know, once you've got outline planning. So at the moment, with everything going on, I can't see myself being in favour of this, but I would like to know that we will have a chance to have this back at the committee, because I think the committee needs to make decisions on this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Ian, I think you answered that a few minutes ago, but
if I may, Chair. So the committee are making the decision this evening on the application. The deferral back to officers is for approval. All officers are doing is getting a legal agreement, checking the legal agreement in consultation with the legal department to ensure it secures all the heads of terms that are outlined in the committee report, and then doing the administrative task of simply effectively printing out the decision notice and issuing it to the applicant. So it isn't a case that we're deferring it to do anything other than what's in the report. As mentioned, any further applications for reserve matters would be, has the potential to come back, and obviously there is clearly a lot of interest in this site. I think I just wanted to come back on one point with regards to the affordable housing point. From the evidence that's been taken into account, the site won't come forward for housing development as allocated in the local plan with the infrastructure that's required as part of the local plan in a circuit, with more than what's been put forward. And that means effectively that the benefits of what has been provided, even though it is acknowledged to be less than 30% affordable housing, is that you are getting the 10% affordable housing, the 36 affordable rent homes, and the 9 shared ownership or affordable product homes will come forward. If the site doesn't come forward, those new homes don't come forward. And so the benefits of the housing do need to be taken into account by members, especially when we're in a circumstance as we are, which is that we are in a presumption in favour of sustainable development, which means that we are subject to the restrictions under the housing delivery test that allows for applications, when they're outside of our planned urban confines, to be given a bit more weight than they would if we could obviously meet those targets. So we are in a situation where the allocated sites take on that much more importance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ian, to you and your team for a good presentation. But I'm not going to repeat everything everybody else has said, but I still have concerns over this lack of social housing, and we seem to be getting a pattern now. I think 10% is far too low. I understand the reasons why, but I feel like the developers are now holding us to ransom on this. It seems to be forming a pattern. And there must be some way that we can say that we can't go between, 20% or even 18 as we did at Tivoli. But I do understand where you're coming from. I'm going to say something which possibly isn't relevant, but in some respects it is. What I'm seeing here when you're talking about the drainage and the water and the flooding, I've seen this situation before and it has never, ever been rectified. And that I'm going to refer back to a place called Hackney Wick. There is a place called Old Ford, Hackney Wick and Wells Street. All three of them are connected. And when it rains, and it rains hard, the whole area floods. That's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Can I ask you where that is?
Hackney.
Right. I know we're talking to Margate here, but I take your point. Councillor Jill Bayford.
Thank you, Chair. I too share all the concerns of our speakers tonight on this huge development, but we have had the benefit tonight of very, very clear presentations, and I feel very detailed answers to our many questions. I personally feel that at this stage it would be impossible to give any more detail than has been given at outline stage. There have been clear explanations why the affordable housing is 10%. Obviously, that's regrettable to me too, but Mr. Livingstone's made it very clear that that cannot be more on any other development on this site. There's been a clear outline of the adopted transport strategy. Questions relating to GPs, flood management have been clearly answered. In my view, we should support this application at outline stage, but when it comes back for, I'm sure it will, for reserved matters, look at these matters in every detail, which I'm sure will be addressed. Thank you to everybody who has given us the benefit of so much detail tonight. For these reasons, I personally would like to support the application at this stage. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bayford. Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure all members appreciate all the work that's gone into reaching this stage of the application. Most of my concerns have been brought up and discussed. I won't go over them again. I just feel that regarding the affordable housing, I always feel where there's a will, there's always a way. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Curry. Councillor Patmore.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just a couple of questions. If we get 10% instead of 30 social housing, it's a bit mean. There are 28 two-bedroom flats, and we've been allocated 24 of them for social housing. Bit unfair. The development will not be for local people because nobody will be able to afford them, apart from 10% social housing. And if this contractor gets away with so much, what's to stop others from doing it? And who is paying for the roadworks? And all this money that is being paid by the contractor instead of the social housing, whose benefit is it for? I don't think it's for Thanet, because KCC are going to benefit from this with payments for schools and libraries, things like that, that we will be paying for twice. And if we have to agree with this or defer it to officers, why have we had this meeting? It doesn't give us any choice at all. I won't be voting for it because I think we're being taken for a ride.
But thank you, officers, for all the hard work you've done on it. It's been very informative. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Yes, I will. Ian, you wish to come back on that?
Just briefly, I think it's just important to say with regards to contributions that are being secured on a financial basis, they are contributions to be utilised by KCC, but they're for projects in Thanet. They are to provide community facilities and clear and demonstrable social benefits with regards to education facilities in Thanet. So it is to mitigate the impact of the additional houses on Thanet. Just on the point, and again, I appreciate I'm repeating myself, so I do apologise on this. It is on every single site, the affordable housing issue is looked at in detail when there is not a provision for a policy compliance scheme. In terms of the specific bits on this site and the actual heads of terms, it is about, there are two review mechanisms that would go into any legal agreement which allow us to re-look at issues to do with highway costs. If the MRN bid comes in, there is potentially about £3.6 million that comes immediately into that infrastructure pot and affordable housing pot to be utilised for those purposes. It is, throughout the process as well, a general review to ensure that whether or not we can actually get some off-site contributions towards affordable housing for any changes to values and costs. And it isn't the case that it sets an example, in my view, for other developers, because every developer has a significant amount of scrutiny when they put in a viability assessment. And we do not, as shown last week, we do not roll over. And in this instance, there is, though, a very specific evidence base that means that we've put the position before committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Hart, do you wish to come back? And then I'm going to draw a line and comments.
Thank you, Chair. We've all had a very interesting and informative evening, I think. The one thing I'd like to pick up on just slightly is that Councillor Gregory mentioned that we put our climate emergency in force. And because this is a very clean site, in other words, everything is starting from scratch, can we ensure that they look at the building company, look at either ground source heating or solar panels on these properties to make sure that our children and our grandchildren actually see something that we are doing to make a difference to their lives? Because all we're doing is building houses which will really be inefficient in 10 years. And we could actually set an example now to make sure that we are doing something for our grandchildren. Because if we don't do it now, it never happen. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Hart. Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Scott. Members, I said I would draw a line. I think, once again, an excellent debate tonight on the subject which we all knew people wanted to talk about. And I will say, as chair, and the reports we've had from officers has been excellent, and reading the 166 pages which members more likely have done, very, very interesting, and some very, very good points. I mean, I know the area, which I'm sure you know, as I touched on just now, the Tivoli Brook, and I can see concerns there. But what we've got to remember, and this is me saying it to yourselves, members, is that everything has and is being looked into. There's been some very, very valid points made tonight, and the concerns about affordable housing, I understand it's not all about me, it's about yourselves. And I'm sure the officers, well, I know the officers do what they can on all that side of things. Councillor Hart, you have a very good point there about, years to come. Some of us might not be here, well, won't be here, but again, a very valid point. So I'm going to put this to members. Obviously, I have no right to ask how to vote, and I think you all know that. But please consider what has been said to us all tonight. In that light, as I say, I'm coming to yourselves. with the officer's recommendation, which is to defer and delegate for approval. And remember also that items will come back to the planning committee at different stages. So for those who are watching us on the screen, which I'm sure there are still, members know how this works. If you are for the motion, please say so. If you're against, say against. If you're abstaining, abstain. So I'll go through the members. Councillor Coleman-Cook.
For.
Councillor Alban.
Against on principle of affordable housing, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Alban. Councillor Bayford.
For.
Councillor Curry.
Abstain.
Councillor Dennis.
Abstain.
Councillor Garner.
Against.
Councillor Hart.
On principles, I think I've got to go against.
Councillor Patmore.
Against.
Councillor Paulmore.
Against, Chair.
Councillor Rozeski. Councillor Rozeski.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I'll go for it. Thank you.
Councillor Scott.
Yes, Chair. In light of all the information proceeded today, I still, in no good faith, can support this. I'm against, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Wright.
Against.
I am for it. I believe that motion has been lost. It has. Right. I've got to come over to Ian.
Thank you, Chair. So members have outlined specific concerns, primarily with regards to the provision of affordable housing on the scheme. I think that's probably the through line reason. Obviously, we've looked at a number of the other concerns and talked about those in a bit of detail. What I would say in terms of the point to do with affordable housing is that obviously from the evidence that's been presented before us, if affordable housing is to increase, as I said, that will decrease the contributions to other things. Now, that is a decision that members can make. They can look at that as an option. It is for members of the planning committee to decide what are the priorities of the district when it comes to what's secured as planning obligations. But there is obviously that is what would happen. Now, this site is an allocated housing site. It is bringing forward significant infrastructure. And so my recommendation, given that we are in a situation where affordable housing is the through line, is that what would occur is that the application would be deferred back to officers. What we would do is we would speak to the applicant, we would work out alternative scenarios with regards to the affordable housing provision, whether or not that's possible. Now, we did this before with the Salmston Grange application, and we presented a few different options. It didn't increase the amount of affordable housing, but it provided different options. Now, we can look at an increase in the provision of affordable housing to some extent, but what that will do is it will decrease the other contributions that will be provided. And obviously that does have its own natural knock-on. But I think given that that is the specific through line, that my recommendation to members would be to defer back to officers to look at alternatives with regards to the provision of planning obligations, specifically in relation to affordable housing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Ian. Members, you've heard Mr. Livingston's recommendation. I know that it is from an officer, which I will accept. I need a proposer for that, so it does come back for you further discussion on what you've heard. Could I have a proposer, please?
I'll propose that, Chair. Councillor Rozeski.
Thank you, Councillor Rozeski. A seconder, please.
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bayford. Once again, I will have to go through your names. If you agree, please say so. If you are against, say so. And if you're abstaining. Councillor Coleman-Cook.
For.
Councillor Alban.
For.
Councillor Bayford.
For.
Councillor Curry.
For.
Councillor Dennis.
For.
Councillor Garner.
For.
Councillor Hart.
4, Chair.
Councillor Pat Moore.
4.
Councillor Paul Moore.
4.
Councillor Roseski.
4.
Thanks. Councillor Scott.
Abstain, Chair.
Councillor Wright.
4.
And myself, I'm 4 as well. Members, that has been carried. And obviously, we will hear the outcome and whenever that will be. So thank you, members. Again, thank you, officers. That concludes this meeting this evening. One thing I would like to say before we close, this, I believe, unless we're going to be throwing another meeting in before the council's AGM in May, but I believe, obviously, members know that committees change and so forth and so on. I don't know where, I think you know what I'm getting at. Things do move around at AGMs. But I would like to say, and I mean this, I mean, I know most of you personally anyway. For 2 years as chair of planning, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I know I've been on planning for 18 years now, I think it is. In the last year, it's been very interesting and how it's worked. I'd like to thank you all because you've helped me, and thank you to the officers. And let's see what happens next month. But again, thank you all of you for your support. I think we've had a damn good planning committee, and I've said that to many people. Thank you. And good night.